Hello everyone. So in today's video I'll be covering some of the concepts and theories used to create a player select screen for your main menu. And in this I used arrays, lists, scriptable objects, get child, and also the user interface, kind of setting that up and how it all ties together. And there's also saving data with the scriptable objects, so we'll go over that as well. But yeah, basically we've got the characters here, and then over here we've got the clans, the Crane clan or Koi clan, so we can kind of go back and forth and selecting different characters within that clan. So something like that for your loadout screen. So yeah, all right, we'll go ahead and I'll start going over the different kind of aspects of it. In this part one, it's going to be the arrays. So I'll go ahead and press play here, and I'll show you what I mean. So for the next item, and there, and then we can go back. And so over here is the base object holding my different game objects, and then the canvas, it has the change item script for the component that holds the reference to the array. So we'll go ahead and check out the script, and so here's our game objects that we're looking at for the players, and then the active one, and then the next item as ints. So going through that, and so here on our next, this is our next button. We'll call this when the user hits the next button. And so at the end of the array, we're going to wrap back. So when next equals player's length, the full length. If that's the next item, then we want to just wrap back to 0 here. And so when I'm minusing 1 here, we always have to subtract 1 from the length, because the array itself starts at 0. Though the length, when we count it, it counts it starting at 1. So you think next is starting at 0, and then the full length, that starts at 1. And then once we've checked if the next item is if there are no more items, then we're going to go back to 0. So we're going to set the item to 0, and then down here, if we've made it this far, if we're not putting the item at 0, we're just going to continue to count up. So, and then pretty much vice versa for the last here. On our last button, we're just going backwards. Skip to the end if we're at the start, and then continue counting down if we're not at the start of the list. And then here is where the change selection, this will get called for both the next and the last. Whenever the next gets changed in either the if or the else if, we're going to change that in the active. This active is what we're going to use to set the player's array. So the active represents our array's position. So whatever this number is, whatever active is, that's going to be the one that we're going to set false. And then right after that, we're going to change the active item to what the user has selected in the next or the last buttons. So we change it, and then down here we set that next item to true. And so that's how this works out. That's how you can kind of go through a list without reaching the end. You can just kind of consistently go through. And there's other ways of doing this, obviously, but you can kind of see how it works fairly simple. And we can also expand on this. And what I mean is kind of getting off of the arrays and you can see how I buried them in the base. This is part 2 here, and in this scene we'll take a look at the canvas. Instead of having an array, like we'll go back to scene 1, how the canvas has the players 3 here. In part 2, we just need to add the 1, how I have all of these objects as a child of the base. And it works just the same, and I'll show you how that's in the code here. And so as opposed to, so I can minimize these are the same, the next and the last exactly the same, but here are player transform get child, and I've put a link in here, so you can download this package. I'll leave a link in that in the description. It'll be on Google Drive. And so here we're doing the same thing, so you can see here it's exactly the same thing, setting it, false or true based on that. But instead of just telling the players array, what position, we're looking at the position of the child object, which is a pretty neat way of looking at things, and that's what was able to make this, because looking at your player, it'd be nice to spawn in all your different characters, but having them all kind of right here, it makes it a lot more efficient for your gameplay, for your loading and stuff like that. And also it just kind of cleans things up via the script, so it's easier to kind of process where things are going and how they're getting there and why, and you can kind of build off of this other components, items, swords, weapons, food, health, stuff like that. So here, if we continue, let's go ahead and take a look at lists. And essentially what this is, we're adding the like I was saying, having a weapon item or a health item, consider that like this material. So we're changing the material, and I have 4 different ones: the red, white, blue, yellow, and so it stays consistent when I change the material, and it goes through like that. And you can set that off so each different item has its own unique color. So there's ways of doing that as well. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this script. And so here's our array of materials that we're adding to our canvas. And so here's our materials. That's the only array that I've created for this one. The renderers, if we see here, it's not populated. It auto-populates when we press play based on this base game object. And so it'll auto-populate those children objects. And so looking at the script here, when we look at the renderer using this list here, we're going to go through the for statement, and it's going to count the objects, and then right here the child count of that main base object. And so it has the render list that it'll auto-populate each of those render components to. And then down here we want to go ahead and change the material to whatever is set in that that array. Because if there's nothing, if you don't have anything set, if it's just a generic material that you have for your game object, we want to go ahead and automatically place that right when the player starts, so there's no confusion or it doesn't look goofy. And so the next material here, this is essentially an extension of the change item, or the next item that we have down here, next and last. So those That's pretty much the same, with its own nuance. We're counting the material's length versus the player transform child count. But we still are minusing the 1 in that same fashion. But essentially it's everything that's the same. We're just counting that its own unique list. And so we continue here. We change the material. Here's the result of the start, update function from selecting the next or last buttons. It's going to go ahead and take that active and set the material with the active material. So the active item is going to be set with the active material. And so that's how the list works. So yeah, when we press play, it'll auto-populate here, and we can go through and it'll let us know what the active materials or items are. And alright, so now let's go ahead and take a look at scriptable objects. This is where it gets really interesting. So it takes a lot of the kind of burden off of working just in the components. The scriptable object here that I created, you can create it with the array list, and user material is the one that we're working with in this scenario or this part. And so I've got the white, the red, the blue, and the yellow materials here, and this also allows for other things like strings and stuff like that, which you could do via the other component system. But this, it's a little more friendly to look at, and there's also UI elements coming in the pipeline where you'd be able to manipulate this data a lot easier. So it's good to get to know scriptable objects. And alright, so we'll go ahead and oh yeah, it was playing. So you can see here, and it has the name here, and it works all just like the rest of them. And we can see here we're calling the user data here, and this is referencing those materials instead of we were using the array here to add the materials. We're just adding that user data, which has its own arrays with that special information. And so here is the script for creating the array, and here's the materials that we're calling. Here's the item name, here's the material that we're using for each individual material, the red, the yellow, white, blue, and then we're gonna, sorry for the lack of a better name here, but change material to, we are calling the material scriptable object here as opposed to the materials themselves, or the material themselves. And most of the stuff is pretty much the same. Not much is changing here. User data dot item. So user data dot materials. Here we go. Sorry, let me. And so yeah, user data dot materials, and then again we're gonna use the next item or next material, in our next button, last button, and then also the active item. We're changing that item's material, and sorry for the redundancy on the materials, and also you kind of probably want to stay away from using material or materials just because it's so close to Unity's use of material. So I'm just using this just for lack of a better term again, sorry. But yeah, so We continue down here, and then we're able to call that name essentially the same way. In these brackets here, we're passing the item name, which is a string, to the material name dot text. And so here on our canvas, that's where our text is. Let me see. And that's what's changing. You could do the same thing with the item, essentially. So, but yeah. All right. So here on part 5, we want to be able to save the data. Whenever whenever you're putting a game out there, you want to be able to let the player, kind of go through. Or you want that functionality. That's just a kind of a staple. It's been around since we've been playing video games on Nintendo. So if I pause and start, so yeah, that's all sort of how that works. This, it sort of looks the same, and we do have a new int down here. Let's go ahead and take a look at this script here. And so, if we want to delete the data, that's pretty important. So, in case you're troubleshooting and stuff, and also kind of the first couple of builds, you may want to have this feature around just in case. And that gets called here in our start. So if the bool is true, then we're going to delete the player prefs. We'll delete all. So if this here is checked, it'll clear data. We're going to go back to white, and then I'm going to unpause so I can uncheck this. We're still on white. We'll change that just to demonstrate. And so you can see it did change. And it's also saving the item. So via the script here, let's go, yep. We have the material active, which is inside of the active material. The material active is what's being saved, and then it gets this value is what is called to the active material. So what this, and same down here for the item active and the active item. The active item and the active material are called via the script to determine whether or not. And this here in the start, we're calling what has been saved already. We're not updating yet. We're just calling what is saved, what's already true. And then we're updating it. Here, I'm going to minimize these. We're updating it down here. So whenever the next button or the last button are pushed, then we can update the active material in the scriptable object, which is saved to the player prefs. So whenever you start the game, it's going to be that player's character or the weapon or item that they've chosen, level where they're at. You can use that kind of theory, in so many different ways of saving your levels. And so that's sort of how that's called. And then we would call that active item here in the array brackets. And so that is how those are. Like, here's our text. You could do images, like how I have on this guy here with these images. So there's lots of stuff. there's lots of data, lots of information. The player objects are sort of, looked at as like I did forget to do something on him, but yeah. So looking at how you would approach this, there's many different ways, and there's you could also expand on this so many different ways, making this just sort of a base template, and building off of this with a car game or a farm game, whatnot. But yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of let this video kind of roll. It's me building this scene here, so I'll have links to everything in the description below. I really do appreciate your time. I hope I hope you were able to learn something today. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye.